Welcome back to her Fireside Stories. I used to think being a mother meant giving everything and asking for nothing in return. But then came the day they dragged me into court, family blood trying to take the home I'd spent my life building. I stood there alone, no lawyer, no backup, just the truth and the last bit of pride I had left. And when I spoke, the entire courtroom fell silent. If you've ever been pushed too far, this story might just bring tears to your eyes and strength to your heart. If I had known my own daughter would spit venom at me the very day she dented my favorite car, I told myself maybe I would have put it up for sale even sooner. The words circled in my head that night, stinging my pride and rattling my faith in the only child I'd ever loved so fiercely. To be clear, my daughter Aurora and I once shared a close bond, an unbreakable connection forged during her childhood. But after decades of carrying her burdens, supporting her through rocky relationships, and doing everything in my power to ensure her future, I saw a side of her I never imagined existed. When she stomped into my house last month, pink-tinted hair in disarray and a scowl plastered on her face, I thought I was witnessing a teenage tantrum. Only Aurora wasn't a teenager anymore. She was 33 years old, and the fierce pink layered cut that once looked fun and free-spirited now seemed a bit jarring in the context of adult responsibilities. My name is Frances Weaver, and I'm 72 years old, although I like to say that I've lived 2 or 3 separate lifetimes in that span. My own hair, a sleek silver bob that I get trimmed every few weeks, has endured more heartache and stress than I ever expected from motherhood. My ex-husband Lionel used to joke I'd walk into my golden years with a head full of bright white hair, a regal crown forged from stress Lionel. By the way, sports a classic salt and pepper undercut these days, giving him that aging suave gentleman look everyone seems to admire. He left me years ago, but it seems he never truly left our daughter's side. That was the crux of my dilemma, Aurora storming in at 33 jobless and newly divorced from a man who spent her last dime. She insisted on taking my prized green sedan, a vehicle I'd cherished for years, and promptly crashed it into a railing. Then she had the nerve to say I was controlling her, that I was stuck in the past, and unable to see the reality of who she'd become. It was a blow that cut deeper than any fender bender. And so, as I lay in bed that night staring into the darkness, a wild idea formed. Sell the car she claimed I cared about more than her just to prove a point. It's not like I was born yesterday. I've been around the block professionally, emotionally, and physically. The house I live in is a place Lionel and I built back when Aurora was only a toddler. We scrimped, saved, hammered nails, painted walls, and transformed a battered old structure into the massive suburban oasis it is today, tucked behind tall hedges and sporting a wraparound porch. It has enough rooms to comfortably house a family of 5. Once upon a time, I thought we'd fill those extra rooms with more children, or maybe with visits from grandkids, once Aurora married, but things rarely go as planned. Looking back, I realized that Lionel and I had cracks in our marriage from the very beginning. Where I was a meticulous planner, he was spontaneous. Where I embraced a more classic style, like my silver bob, he experimented even sporting a man bun in his 40s before settling on his current salt and pepper undercut. We were simply too different, or maybe too stubborn, to find common ground. And so, after close to 30 years, we let it all crumble. He walked away, claiming he couldn't breathe under the weight of my perfectionism, and Aurora, who was about 16 at the time, pinned the blame on me. She said I should have tried harder to be more fun, more carefree, less controlling. Funny how that word keeps haunting me. After the divorce, Aurora moved in with Lionel, who at that point was eager to play the good guy. It seemed easier for her to side with her father, a man free of rules, than to put up with my expectations of decency, honesty, and accountability. While they occasionally threw me a phone call to check in, I became something of an afterthought in her eyes. The years flew by, and we drifted further apart. I convinced myself it was for the best, telling myself she was grown and needed to learn on her own. But I won't lie, when Aurora came knocking on my door in her 30s, tears brimming at the corners of her eyes, I hoped it was a chance to rebuild, to reclaim the closeness we'd lost. Little did I know that her presence would turn my world upside down more violently than any heartbreak Lionel ever subjected me to. Aurora's arrival was dramatic and messy, much like her hair, which she'd recently dyed a shade of pastel pink. She dragged 2 suitcases up my walkway and announced she had nowhere else to go. Her husband, a man I'd never particularly liked, had siphoned her savings. She admitted she was broke, desperate, and stranded. Despite every misgiving, I let her move back in. I suppose I should have remembered she was no helpless teenager in need of my permission, but I couldn't help seeing traces of the vulnerable, curious little girl she once was. The first week felt hopeful. She helped me with some household chores, rummaged through old photo albums, and occasionally seemed interested in connecting, or at least in hearing about the life I'd built for myself in her absence. But then cracks began to appear. She started sleeping until noon, leaving dirty dishes everywhere, and rummaging through my belongings without asking. Worst of all, she asked to borrow my treasured green sedan, a modest but well-maintained car that I considered both a symbol of my independence and an heirloom of my hard work. Against my better judgment, I handed over the keys, cautioning her to treat it with care. She treated it like a throwaway. One evening, Aurora came home late, the front bumper scraped and the driver's side door dented in. When I demanded an explanation, she shrugged, called me overprotective, and said the damage wasn't that bad. My anger was volcanic. I didn't care so much about the physical damage, though. That was infuriating, but the callous disrespect stung like a betrayal. How had she gone from apologetic daughter to eye-rolling roommate in just a matter of weeks? That night, I stared at my reflection in the bathroom mirror, the overhead light accentuating every silver strand in my bob. My heart pounded with a mix of heartbreak and rage. She had hammered at my very soul with her cold indifference. That's when I resolved to sell the car. If she insisted on calling me controlling, then I'd give her a reason to see just how in control I could be. The next day, after a sleepless night, I walked into the kitchen to find Aurora rummaging through the fridge. Gone was the sad, apologetic young woman who begged me for a second chance. In her place stood someone who refused to acknowledge the weight of what she'd done. When I confronted her about the car's damage, she ran a hand through her pastel pink layers and said, "You're blowing this out of proportion. It's just a stupid car." With each dismissive word, my frustration mounted. I pressed her for details. Where exactly had she been driving? Who was she with? Why hadn't she mentioned the accident immediately? She shrugged, refusing to offer more than half-hearted excuses. Then she landed the low blow. "You're such a control freak, Mom. Maybe if you loosened up, I'd actually want to tell you things." That was the moment I felt something inside me snap. For years, Aurora and Lionel had labeled me controlling, but to hear it like this spat out in the context of her reckless behavior made the accusation cut deeper. I didn't yell, I didn't hurl insults. Instead, a cold calm washed over me. I told her in no uncertain terms that I'd be selling the car. She laughed an incredulous mocking sound and walked away, dismissing me as if I were a tantrum-throwing toddler. But she had underestimated just how determined I could be. By noon, I was on the phone with a used car dealership in town. By 3 p.m., a potential buyer was asking for a test drive, and by dinner time, my beloved green sedan was officially off my hands. A check in my name lay on the kitchen counter, making a brutal statement about the finality of my decision. Aurora stumbled into the house later that night and asked if she could borrow the car again. I led her to the empty garage. Her reaction, an explosive mix of fury and shock, gave me no satisfaction. If anything, it broke my heart more. I loved that car. But I loved her too once. Now I wondered if she even cared, or if she was just furious at having lost something she felt entitled to. Selling the car was a rash move, perhaps, but it was also the loudest message I could send. In the aftermath of that decision, the tension in the house rose to dizzying new heights. Aurora accused me of being heartless. She locked herself in her old bedroom walls, still painted in that lilac shade she'd adored as a teenager, and texted Lionel about my behavior. I heard snippets of her phone conversations through the closed door. How I was crazy. How my age was finally getting to me. How I couldn't be reasoned with. Yet beneath all that anger, I glimpsed something else: fear. Aurora was on shaky ground, broke, divorced, and living under a roof, controlled by a mother she never truly understood. As for me, I tried to keep myself busy. I dusted furniture that didn't need dusting, rearranged kitchen cabinets, and even ventured into the attic to declutter boxes that dated back to Aurora's childhood. In one of those boxes, I found a faded photograph. Aurora as a toddler perched on Lionel's shoulders, sporting bright pigtails that shimmered in the afternoon sun. I felt a pang of sorrow. Where had that sweet child gone? Was she buried somewhere beneath the bitterness and entitlement? In the evenings, I'd brew myself a cup of chamomile tea, sit in the living room, and reminisce about the steps that led me here. Once upon a time, I had loved Lionel. I had taken pride in our life together. I had cherished Aurora as the center of my universe. Then came the slow disintegration of that world. Lionel walked away first, but Aurora's departure had hurt the most. The years I spent alone in this big house convinced me I was tough enough to handle anything. But the day she returned, I realized I wasn't as tough as I thought. Now I felt raw, as though a single harsh word could slice me open. Still, I refused to let her steamroll me. I decided that if she didn't want to respect the boundaries of my home, I'd have no choice but to issue a final ultimatum: shape up or move out. Yet a small voice inside me whispered, "What if she leaves forever this time?" Could I handle that? Turns out my fear of losing Aurora for good was about to collide with a more complex terror: their plan to prove I was unfit to manage my own life. The day after I sold the car, my phone rang. I assumed it was the dealership calling with some leftover paperwork, or perhaps a friend checking in. I should have recognized the muted ring of trouble. It was Lionel calmly explaining that Aurora had shared her concerns with him. According to her, I was experiencing cognitive decline, acting out of character, and making rash decisions that put my well-being at risk. Francis, Lionel's voice crackled over the line. "I'm genuinely worried. Selling the car so impulsively. That's not like you." I gripped the phone, stunned by his audacity. He was the man who'd left me to pick up every piece of our shattered marriage. Now, all these years later, he claimed to be an authority on my typical behavior. I wanted to laugh in his face, but the fury welling up inside my chest choked the humor right out of me. "What are you implying?" I managed to say, my tone icier than the winter wind. Lionel hesitated before continuing. "Aurora thinks you might need professional help. She said you've been yelling at her unpredictably, forgetting small tasks, and losing track of basic finances." My jaw dropped. Forgetting tasks. Aurora was the one who lost track of rent, of bills, of schedules. How dare she turn that accusation onto me? Before I could formulate a coherent response, Lionel added, "Look, I'm just concerned. If you can't look after yourself, maybe it's time to consider stepping back from some responsibilities. We can discuss what that might look like: your finances, the house, everything." That last word, everything, rang in my ears long after the call ended. They weren't just worried about my mental state. They were interested in my possessions, the house I'd built from scratch, and the life I'd reconstructed after their betrayals. When I hung up, my hands were trembling. This was more than a family squabble. It was an attempt to undermine me, to paint me as a fragile old woman who needed guardianship. And it all started with selling that car, my rightful property. I had no regrets, but I did have a new resolve: if they wanted a fight, they were going to get. Lionel's insinuations lit a fuse under me. I felt a surge of adrenaline that banished all thoughts of bowing to their demands. Over the next few days, Aurora and I barely spoke. When we did, it was tense, polite conversation. Pass the salt or I'm heading out. But the hush of our interactions only sharpened my awareness that a storm was looming. I could see it in the way she typed furiously on her phone whenever I walked by, or in how she gave me forced smiles that didn't quite reach her eyes. I decided it was time for me to seek legal advice. Age aside, I had the right to protect my assets, my independence, and my reputation. If Lionel and Aurora wanted to spin some tale of incompetence, they'd soon learn I was more than capable of defending myself. I booked an appointment with Dana Gray, a local attorney who specialized in elder law. The irony of needing an elder law specialist wasn't lost on me, but I told myself it was just a label one that would keep me from getting bulldozed by Lionel's cunning. When I arrived at Dana's office, my heart thumped nervously. She greeted me with a warm smile. Her black hair was cut in a stylish bob, not unlike mine, though hers was tinted with electric blue streaks. "Mrs. Weaver," she began, "tell me what's going on." For the next hour, I poured out my story. Aurora's returned the car fiasco, Lionel's phone call hinting at my so-called incompetence, and the fear that they'd try to seize control of my life. Dana listened intently, scribbling notes. When I finished, she leaned forward. "You've taken the right step," she said. "If they try to claim you can't manage your affairs, we'll need comprehensive proof that you're fully capable, medical evaluations, financial statements, testimonies from people who know you well." My stomach lurched at the thought of having to prove something so basic as my own sanity, but Dana's reassurance steadied me. "You are in the driver's seat here," she continued. "Not them. Let's keep it that way." I left her office feeling both vindicated and apprehensive. The legal route might be my only shot at safeguarding my independence, but it also confirmed my worst fear. This was going to be a war. Meanwhile, the atmosphere at home grew heavier by the day. Aurora tiptoed around, still nursing resentment about the car. She whispered on calls, her pink hair bouncing as she paced from room to room, carefully avoiding me as if I were the plague. I occasionally heard pieces of conversation, her telling Lionel how I was impossible to deal with, how she felt trapped, how she believed I was losing it. The gall of it still baffled me. I was the one who'd taken her in, offered her a roof over her head, and this was how she repaid me. Weeks passed in tense stalemate. I finalized details with Dana, gathering bank statements, old utility bills, and any documentation that might prove I was more than capable of keeping my affairs in order. For a woman in her 70s, I was actually quite tech-savvy. I'd managed my finances online for years, setting up automated payments, monitoring investments, the whole 9 yards. Hardly the behavior of someone who couldn't tell left from right. Despite our emotional distance, Aurora was still my daughter, and watching her mope around the house triggered an odd mix of fury and empathy. One day I found her in the backyard sitting cross-legged by the old wooden fence that needed repainting. She looked so lost, gazing into the emptiness as if searching for a way out. A pang of motherly concern gnawed at me. What if she truly believed this story she and Lionel were spinning? What if she'd convinced herself I was the problem? I approached quietly. "Aurora, if something's bothering you, we can talk." She tilted her head, scanning my face as though looking for sincerity. Then she shrugged, her eyes rimmed red. "Talking won't fix anything. Mom." Before I could respond, she stood and walked away, leaving me there with a hollow ache in my chest. It hit me then, even if I won every legal battle, would it be worth losing my child forever? But I had to push that question aside because the alternative, letting them label me as an unfit woman, was unthinkable. I had sacrificed too much in life to be painted as incompetent in my final decades. There was no turning back now. Days later, I got an email from Dana. She'd learned that Lionel had formally filed a petition questioning my capacity to handle personal and financial matters. The hearing was scheduled for 3 weeks from that date. Just reading the legal jargon made my stomach churn. Concerns regarding mental and emotional stability, possible need for conservatorship, and other terms that stripped me of my autonomy. My cheeks burned with anger. This was it. Lionel was making his move, no doubt, with Aurora's reluctant or maybe eager assistance. Determined not to succumb to panic, I spent the next couple of days meticulously organizing my paperwork. I rehearsed how I'd present my case, if called to testify. I even scheduled a routine physical and cognitive checkup with my doctor who'd known me for years and was ready to vouch for my health. In some twisted sense, it felt like I was preparing for a final exam, a test to prove I deserved to run my own life. The absurdity of it all made me want to laugh and scream in equal measure. Aurora, for her part, drifted through the house like a ghost, rarely meeting my gaze. She must have known about the petition, but she offered no explanation or apology. Maybe guilt weighed her down. Maybe she'd convinced herself she was doing the right thing. The tension between us felt like stepping on eggshells in a minefield. One wrong move and everything might blow up. Through it all, my resolve hardened. I would go to that hearing. I would look Lionel in the eye. I would firmly declare my competence, my right to live without interference from a man who abandoned our marriage, or from a daughter who refused to own up to her own mistakes. And if they persisted, I would fight them both until I drew my final breath. Let us know how you'd handle this situation, and don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss more touching stories like this one. The day of the hearing arrived with a tense dawn. I dressed carefully, choosing a tailored navy blue suit that accentuated my posture, head held high, shoulders back. My silver bob, freshly styled, gleamed under the overhead lights of my bedroom. This was no time to appear fragile. I wanted the judge to see a woman who was both elegant and unwavering. Dana picked me up, and we drove in near silence to the courthouse. My heart thrummed, but I kept my anxiety in check by focusing on small details: the hum of the car engine, the way the morning sun glanced off the glass exterior of the courthouse, the ring on my finger that I refused to remove even after my divorce. Each detail felt like an anchor rooting me in the present moment, so I wouldn't dissolve into a spiral of nerves. Upon entering the courtroom, my eyes immediately fell on Lionel standing by his lawyer. His once adventurous hairstyle was now neatly combed salt and pepper, making him look distinguished, an image that belied the manipulator I knew him to be. He offered me a stiff nod. Next to him stood Aurora, hair pulled back in a messy bun, her pastel pink layers tamed for the occasion. She wore a plain blouse and slacks, trying to appear earnest and serious, I suppose. My heart twisted at the sight of her. She refused to meet my eyes. The hearing commenced as Lionel's lawyer laid out the reasons they believed I was unfit: impulsive decisions like selling my car without warning, alleged forgetfulness, emotional volatility, and questionable financial moves. They cited an incident where I missed a minor bill payment last year, something that happened because I was switching my online banking system. The lawyer painted me as a scattered older woman who might be squandering her assets or endangering herself through poor judgment. I listened in stunned silence, astonished at the distortion of facts. Each twist of the narrative felt like a betrayal all over again, especially since Aurora had apparently shared personal anecdotes to support their claim. My pulse hammered, but I refused to break. I'd waited too long to let them see me crumble. When the lawyer finished, my hands trembled slightly on the table. I inhaled a calming breath as Dana rose to deliver our rebuttal. Dana spoke with precision and grace that could have made a ballet dancer envious. She outlined my consistent financial track record, presenting evidence of paid-off mortgages, meticulously kept tax records, and bank statements demonstrating healthy investments. She explained how I had sold the car, not as a reckless impulse, but as a deliberate response to my daughter's irresponsible behavior. She even submitted a written statement from my physician confirming my cognitive health. My turn came soon after. Standing up, I glanced briefly at Aurora, who sat with her arms folded. A tinge of sadness coursed through me, but I cleared my throat and focused on the judge. Your Honor, I began, my voice surprisingly steady. I have run my own household, raised my daughter, managed my finances, and continued to live independently for years. This entire situation arose because I decided to enforce boundaries with an adult child who refused to respect me or my property. If that makes me controlling, so be it, but it doesn't make me incompetent. I saw the judge's expression shift ever so slightly. Whether it was sympathy or simple attentiveness, I couldn't be sure, but it fueled my resolve. I explained the events leading to the car sale, how Aurora had damaged it without remorse, how she belittled me in my own home, how Lionel's sudden involvement felt less like concern and more like a power grab. I made it clear I wasn't senile or forgetful. I was simply done letting others trample over my efforts. From the corner of my eye, I noticed Lionel's jaw tighten. He must have realized how damning it looked to interfere in my affairs after abandoning our marriage for so long. Still, I braced myself for his next move. Men like Lionel never folded easily. They clawed their way to victory, even if it meant hurting the people who once cared for them. When I finished, I sank back into my seat. My heart pounded, my palms sweaty, but relief washed over me. I had spoken my truth. Now it was up to the judge to decide how my story would be written in the eyes of the law. The judge asked a few pointed questions, clarifying timelines and motivations. Dana and I answered calmly, weaving the tale of a woman who'd worked tirelessly to maintain her independence, only to find her own flesh and blood challenging it under the guise of concern. Then came Lionel's chance to speak. He cleared his throat and approached the stand, trying to exude fatherly worry. I never wanted to go this far. He claimed, a polished sincerity coating his words. But I can't watch Frances make these rash decisions. I'm worried about her safety and her financial security. She's not the woman she used to be. I nearly scoffed aloud at his performance. If I wasn't the woman I used to be, it was partly because I had to become tougher after he left me for dust. But I bit my tongue and let Dana handle the cross-examination. She exposed how minimal Lionel's contact had been over the years, how he had rarely offered support, emotional or financial, and how Aurora's recent allegations of my mental decline lacked substantial evidence. Aurora never stepped up to speak on Lionel's behalf, though she sat beside him, eyes cast downward. Whether it was guilt or fear, I couldn't tell. A pang of sorrow hit me. This was my child, and we'd been reduced to adversaries in a legal chess match. Would we ever recover from this? By the time closing statements rolled around, I felt wrung out as though I'd run a marathon. The judge declared he would review all the evidence and testimonies before giving a verdict. Court adjourned, and I caught a glimpse of Aurora hurrying away. Lionel following. They didn't look back, and I didn't call out after them. My own heart felt bruised, but I knew I had done my best. The rest was out of my hands. Dana gripped my shoulder gently. You did well, she whispered. Really well. Though I managed a small smile, my mind couldn't shake a question. What if this was just the beginning of a bigger battle? Waiting for the judge's decision felt like teetering on the edge of a cliff. Each day was a test of patience and emotional resilience. I reminded myself that the law often moves slowly. Dana had warned me it could take weeks for the official ruling, but sometimes judges issue quick decisions when the facts are straightforward. All I could do was go about my routine, watering the potted plants on my porch, tidying the house, and trying to maintain a sense of normalcy in an increasingly abnormal world. Surprisingly, Aurora showed subtle signs of remorse. She started emerging from her room more often, occasionally offering to help with small tasks. One morning, I found her in the kitchen, quietly making coffee for both of us. She avoided eye contact, but slid a steaming mug toward me. "Thought you could use this," she said softly. Her pastel pink hair was bundled into a low ponytail, but a few strands fell around her face. She looked tired, maybe even sad. "Thank you," I murmured, taking a sip. It was a quiet olive branch, a moment of uneasy truce. Still, we didn't address the lawsuit directly. I didn't probe her for answers about her involvement. She didn't volunteer any confessions. We both hovered in a strange limbo, aware that a verdict was looming over us. I wondered if regret was slowly gnawing at her. After all, Aurora used to be the lively spirit in the family, the one whose laughter echoed through these very halls. Was she truly so resentful of me that she'd help Lionel paint me as incompetent? 3 nerve-wracking days later, the phone rang. My pulse spiked at the unknown caller ID. Dana's office. "Francis, good news came," Dana's voice. "The judge reached a decision. He wants us back in court tomorrow for the official announcement." My heart fluttered with relief and dread. It was sooner than expected. Dana's tone suggested optimism, but I held my breath, afraid to hope for too much. I hung up, eyes drifting over to Aurora, who stood in the doorway. "That was my lawyer," I said quietly. "We have a court date tomorrow. The judge is issuing the verdict." She opened her mouth as though to speak, then closed it again. Finally, she nodded. "I see," she whispered, disappearing back into her room. The following morning dawned bright and clear, a deceptive contrast to the churning anxiety in my gut. Once again, I donned a crisp outfit, this time a charcoal gray blazer over a simple blouse. My reflection in the mirror revealed the same lined face, the same silver bob. Yet I felt older, wearier than I had just a month ago. Stress will do that, I suppose. But there was a quiet determination in my eyes, the same one that had led me to protect my boundaries in the first place. Dana and I arrived at the courthouse, heading straight to the designated room. Lionel was already there, pacing. He paused when he saw me, his expression unreadable. Aurora stood near him, arms wrapped around herself as if she was trying to become smaller, less noticeable. I forced myself to meet her gaze. She looked away, biting her lip. My chest tightened. The judge entered, sat at his bench, and shuffled papers. My ears roared with my own heartbeat, but I steadied my breathing, channeling the serenity I'd cultivated through countless nights of restless reflection. In a succinct but firm manner, the judge recapped the arguments from both sides. Then he delivered his ruling, the petition questioning. My competence was denied. There was no evidence I was mentally or emotionally unfit. I would retain full control over my finances, my property, my life. My knees nearly buckled in relief. I exhaled a shaky breath, gratitude surging through me like a tidal wave. Dana gave me a tight smile and a nod, but we remained composed until the judge adjourned. Then she turned to me, her face alight. "Congratulations, Francis." Justice prevailed. My throat felt too thick for words, so I merely offered a grateful smile. Lionel stood to the side, glaring. I could see the bitterness etched in the tightness of his jaw. He muttered something to his lawyer, then left without a glance in my direction. Aurora lingered, shifting from foot to foot as though she wanted to approach me. Her gaze flickered across my face. Her lips parted, but no words came. Finally, she hurried after Lionel, leaving me with a sense that while I'd won in court, I was still losing in another arena, my relationship with my daughter. I returned home that afternoon feeling both triumphant and hollow. The house seemed unusually silent, as if even the walls were holding their breath. Aurora didn't come back that evening. I called out for her at dinner, but no response. The echo of my voice felt eerie in the empty space. I checked her room, found her bed untouched and a few personal items missing. A note lay on the nightstand. "I need some space. Don't worry, I'm safe." Aurora, a wave of conflicting emotions hit me. Part of me was relieved. The tension had become suffocating, and maybe some time apart would do us both good. Another part of me was worried sick. Where would she go? Did Lionel take her in again? Could she manage on her own if he refused? The maternal instinct in me screamed to call her to ensure she was okay. But I knew chasing after her would only reinforce her belief that I was meddling, trying to control her. I spent the next few days in a fog of introspection. My legal problems were resolved for now. But at what cost? My relationship with Aurora, already fractured, was stretched to its breaking point. I tiptoed through the halls, noticing small traces she'd left behind. A half-finished coffee mug, a stray earring on the bathroom counter, the scented lotion she used. Each item was a tiny dagger to my heart, reminding me that my daughter was out there in the world alone and likely resentful. By the end of the week, I fell into a routine morning coffee, afternoon gardening, evening news, and restless nights. I kept expecting Aurora to burst through the door with a sarcastic remark or an outlandish request, but she didn't. The quiet was unnerving. After all, I'd spent so many years on guard, anticipating the next emotional blow. Now left to my own devices, I felt uneasy. I called Dana to let her know Aurora had left. She advised me to keep documenting any incidents or communications in case Lionel revived the custody angle. It was disheartening to realize how quickly familial bonds could devolve into legal footnotes. Still, I held onto a faint hope that Aurora would come to her senses, maybe even come home under better terms. A few weeks later, I got a letter from Lionel's lawyer. For a moment, panic clutched my heart. Were they going to appeal the judge's decision? Try another tactic to declare me unfit? But the letter revealed a new angle. Lionel claimed he was entitled to half the value of the house. Technically, the property was part of our shared assets before the divorce, but the settlement back then gave me sole ownership. He appeared ready to argue that something about the settlement was flawed, or that the house had increased in value beyond what we'd initially negotiated. I felt my anger spike again. Didn't he have enough of my life already? Did he really want to add more misery? Part of me suspected this was revenge for losing the competence case. Another part knew Lionel simply couldn't stand losing control, whether over me, Aurora, or the finances he once believed belonged to him. This time, though, I refused to panic. I called Dana, explained the situation, and we reviewed the divorce settlement. It's airtight, Dana assured me. He signed away his rights to the property years ago. He doesn't have a leg to stand on. Still, she prepared a formal response asserting that his claim was baseless. Despite Dana's confidence, the emotional weight was undeniable. I was tired of fighting, tired of his attempts to wring something from me. Money, property, concessions, whatever he could lay his hands on. Each letter, each legal threat felt like a personal assault, but I reminded myself I had withstood the worst already. If I could face a court challenge to my own sanity, I could handle a cheap ploy for real estate. Meanwhile, I still hadn't heard a peep from Aurora. The only reason I knew she was alive was the occasional text from a mutual friend telling me they saw her working odd shifts at a diner downtown. I considered swinging by, but decided against it. If she wanted me in her life, she'd let me know. Until then, my priority was to protect what I'd built: my finances, my home, and my peace of mind. Just when I thought the dust might finally settle, a car pulled into my driveway one afternoon, a sleek black coupe I didn't recognize. My heart fluttered. Could it be Aurora coming back? But when the driver's door opened out, stepped a tall woman with short-cropped blonde hair. She introduced herself as Jillian, a realtor sent by Lionel to inspect the property. He's insisting he has a financial stake, Jillian said, looking somewhat apologetic. I need to do a walkthrough just to confirm what we might be dealing with. My initial impulse was to slam the door in her face, but Jillian stood there polite and professional, admitting she was just doing her job. With a sigh, I let her in. She walked around snapping photos and noting down details. The marble countertops, the refurbished hardwood floors, the large garden out back. Each click of her camera felt like a violation. This was my sanctuary, my fortress. But I had to grit my teeth and let the process unfold. If I blocked her, it might appear suspicious. After she left, the emptiness of the house seemed magnified. My mind drifted to Aurora again, wondering what she would think of her father's actions now. Then I had a sobering thought. Maybe Aurora's silence meant she didn't disagree with him. Perhaps she believed he deserved a chunk of my property. The notion twisted my stomach into knots. Over the next few days, Jillian's presence lingered in the back of my mind. I started analyzing every corner of my home, anticipating how they might try to attribute improvements or expansions to Lionel. In truth, I'd financed almost all the renovations post-divorce, using my own savings. I had receipts and bank statements to prove it. But the emotional toll was enormous. Every hour spent digging up documents was an hour stolen from the retirement I thought I'd earned. Oddly enough, I felt a surge of determination well up again. Maybe this was some bizarre blessing forcing me to reassert my autonomy and double-check every record. If Lionel thought he could intimidate me out of sheer exhaustion, he was wrong. I wasn't just an old woman with a silver bob anymore. I was a woman on a mission. A week later, as I was sorting receipts in the living room, I heard a hesitant knock on the door. My chest tightened. Another realtor, another lawyer. I braced myself for yet another wave of conflict. Instead, I opened the door to find Aurora, her pink hair pulled into a messy bun, her eyes rimmed with dark circles. She clutched a small duffel bag, and her posture screamed uncertainty. For a moment, I simply stared. Then I stepped aside, letting her in without a word. She looked around the house as if unsure she was still welcome. Finally, she sighed and said, "I'm sorry for how I left Mom." The words were awkward but genuine. My heart clenched. I wanted to be angry. I wanted to remind her of the pain she'd caused. But all I managed was a weary nod. We ended up in the kitchen, sitting at the table that had once hosted so many arguments. I offered her some water, and she took a shaky sip. "I've been staying with a friend," she began, her voice fragile. "Dad offered me a place, but I refused." She paused. I realized how messed up it was, what he was doing, what I was part of. I didn't really want him to take over your life. It just spiraled out of control. She blinked rapidly, fighting tears, and I felt my defenses waver. She went on explaining that she thought calling Lionel might help, that maybe he'd coax me into understanding her viewpoint about the car and about my controlling ways. But she claimed she never expected him to file for guardianship or to start challenging property rights. "He's just so mad he lost in court," Aurora said. "It's like he can't stand that you stood up to him." A heavy silence followed. Then Aurora broke it. "Mom, if there's any way I can help fix this, I want to try. I know I messed up. I know I said terrible things, but I don't want to be the reason Dad is stealing your house." Her voice cracked at the end, and I had to swallow the lump in my own throat. We spent that evening in cautious conversation, an uneasy dance of reconnection. I told Aurora the full extent of Lionel's recent ploys, the letter from his lawyer, the realtor visit, the old divorce settlements he was trying to pick apart. She listened quietly, occasionally cringing, as if the guilt physically pained her. When I asked if she had any idea what Lionel hoped to gain, she hesitated, then whispered, "He's always had a chip on his shoulder about you, Mom. He used to say you made him feel inadequate, that you always had to be the one in control. Maybe he thinks this is his chance to turn the tables." I bit back a retort. Lionel's insecurities were no secret, but that hardly justified this level of malice. Then Aurora surprised me. She insisted on writing a statement, affirming she saw me manage my finances without issue, that I was of sound mind and body, and that she'd been coaxed into exaggerating my forgetfulness. "I can't undo the damage," she said, "but maybe this will help your lawyer slam the door on Dad's claims." I want to do something right for once. It was a small olive branch, but significant. I showed her the evidence I'd gathered, tax documents, receipts for home renovations. the original divorce settlement, and she helped me organize them, sealing them in a large envelope to hand over to Dana. I marveled at how quickly she shifted from adversary to ally once she realized the stakes. Part of me wondered if she was truly sorry or just frightened by how far Lionel had gone, but for now I chose to believe the best. That night, Aurora asked if she could stay. I hesitated only a moment before offering her the spare room. Her old bedroom, she said, still held too many bitter memories. It was a symbolic gesture, maybe, to give her a fresh space, a chance to rebuild trust. Baby steps, I reminded myself. A single apology couldn't erase years of hurt, yet a flicker of hope ignited in my chest, telling me that maybe we could salvage this fragile bond. 2 days later, I received a text from Dana, meeting with Lionel's lawyer tomorrow. We'll finalize our response. Bring any new evidence. I steeled myself. Having Aurora's statement in hand felt like an extra shield. Maybe it wouldn't change the legalities, but it demonstrated that the person who had initially joined forces with Lionel was now on my side. I told Aurora I was heading out to see Dana, and she asked if she could come along. It caught me off guard, her willingness to support me so openly. We drove together to Dana's office, the tension of old arguments replaced by a tentative camaraderie. Along the way, she filled the silence with small confessions. She admitted how lonely she'd felt after her divorce, how she'd convinced herself that I was her enemy, because it was easier than facing her own regrets. Hearing her spill these secrets chipped away at the protective barrier around my heart. It was impossible not to empathize, even while remembering the damage she'd done. Dana greeted us with a surprised smile. She and Aurora shook hands, and Aurora immediately apologized for her role in the guardianship fiasco. Dana, ever the professional, simply nodded and invited us to sit. We spent the next hour reviewing the documents referencing the property improvements I'd made post-divorce and establishing the final statements that would prove Lionel had no legal claim. Aurora contributed bits of information to clarifying timelines when she'd visited me in the past, sometimes noticing construction or new furniture that I alone paid for. When we wrapped up, Dana confidently declared, "I don't see a judge siding with Lionel here. He signed his rights away in the divorce. This is pure harassment." Aurora released a shaky breath, offering me a timid grin. The sense of unity was palpable, even if it was overshadowed by the knowledge that Lionel would likely remain relentless. Later that evening, we returned home. I made a simple dinner of roasted chicken and vegetables, and Aurora actually set the table, something she hadn't done since she was a teenager. The gesture felt almost ceremonial. We ate in companionable silence, each of us absorbing the day's small victory, uncertain yet hopeful about what might come next. What came next was a showdown of sorts, a settlement meeting the following week arranged by Lionel's lawyer to discuss terms before escalating to a full-blown legal fight. Dana advised me to stay calm, hold firm, and only entertain reasonable dialogue. She insisted we had all the proof necessary to dismantle Lionel's claims. "He may try to bully you into an out-of-court agreement," she warned, "but stand your ground." On the day of the meeting, Aurora insisted on accompanying me again. Part of me worried her presence might inflame Lionel's temper, but she pointed out that she was the perfect witness. "He can't spin stories if I'm right there to call him out," she said. We arrived at the law firm's conference room, which boasted floor-to-ceiling windows and an air of hushed formality. Lionel was seated at a long mahogany table, looking every bit the smug antagonist with his pressed suit and meticulously parted hair. His lawyer, a sharp man named Irving, offered a brisk handshake. Dana and I took our seats with Aurora quietly positioning herself beside me. Lionel's gaze flicked to her, and a storm of emotions passed across his face: surprise, betrayal, anger. Irving launched into a pitch about how Lionel had contributed to certain remodeling projects during the marriage. Dana politely countered that everything done post-divorce was on my dime and that the original settlement was crystal clear. Lionel seethed, claiming I'd manipulated that settlement, that I'd coerced him to sign. I almost laughed out loud at the accusation. He was the one who walked away, leaving me with a mortgage and a daughter who despised me at the time. At one point, Aurora spoke up, her voice surprisingly steady. Dad, Mom paid for the renovations. I was there when she took out the second mortgage to cover the kitchen update. You weren't even around. Lionel shot her a glare so venomous that she visibly recoiled, but she held her ground. After nearly 2 hours of back and forth, the conversation hit an impasse. Irving hinted at legal action if we didn't negotiate a payout for Lionel. Dana simply closed her folder, smiled, and said, "We look forward to presenting our side in court." With that, we adjourned, leaving Lionel fuming in the conference room. Walking out of that building felt like stepping into fresh air after being trapped in a musty attic. Aurora and I exchanged relieved looks. Dana was confident, though. She warned me not to underestimate Lionel's persistence. He might file suit just to drag things out, hoping the stress would wear me down. But I'd survived a guardianship challenge. I could handle a property dispute. Over the next few days, I prepared for another wave of legal drama. Sure enough, Irving mailed a thick envelope containing formal court filings. My stomach sank when I read the first few lines accusing me of fraud in the original divorce settlement. Ridiculous, yes, but the notion that I'd have to wade back into courtroom skirmishes exhausted me. Still, a steely resolve took hold. I refused to be Lionel's doormat. Aurora continued living in the spare room. Gradually, we found a new rhythm. She contributed to groceries, folded laundry without being asked, and even offered to mow the lawn. On days I was overwhelmed with legal paperwork, she'd show up with coffee and a small, encouraging smile. The transformation felt surreal. Was this the same daughter who once raged about me being controlling? The same woman who said I was too old-fashioned to understand her life? A pang of guilt tugged at me. I'd sold that car she dented so spitefully, and in doing so, might have kicked off this entire nightmare. But I reminded myself that sometimes tough love is necessary. One evening, she joined me for a quiet supper and asked Mom, "Do you regret letting me move back in?" I paused over my bowl of soup. "Not exactly," I said slowly. "I regret the way things unfolded, but I've never regretted wanting to help you. I just wish we hadn't hurt each other so much along the way." Aurora nodded, her eyes moist. "I'll never forget what I did," she whispered, "but I'm trying to do better." After dinner, I glanced around my house, inhaling the scent of lemon polish and home-cooked meals. I realized that for all the chaos and heartbreak, at least one good thing emerged. Aurora and I were finally moving forward together. The court date for the property dispute arrived quicker than I'd expected. My nerves were already frayed by the guardianship ordeal, and stepping back into a courtroom felt like trudging through a battlefield. I barely had time to leave. Dana reassured me repeatedly, "We've got every scrap of evidence, every witness we need." Relax, Francis. Easier said than done. On the morning of the hearing, Aurora insisted on accompanying me again, and I agreed. She was living proof that Lionel's claims were baseless. She'd witnessed me renovating the house, paying the bills, and maintaining the property alone for years. As we walked into the courthouse, I couldn't help noticing how different things felt from our last trip. Before, Aurora was uncertain, torn between her father and me. Now she seemed resolute. Her pastel pink bun was secured neatly, and she wore a determined expression that felt almost protective. The proceedings started with Lionel's lawyer rehashing the same arguments the house had appreciated in value since the divorce. Lionel was entitled to a portion. I had somehow manipulated the original settlement. Dana systematically dismantled these points, brandishing documents signed by Lionel himself that relinquished any claim to the property. Then Aurora took the stand, speaking softly but confidently about how I handled every maintenance task and expense post-divorce. She highlighted moments like when the roof leaked and I had to fork over thousands to fix it, moments Lionel never contributed to financially or otherwise. Lionel looked furious. His salt and pepper undercut, usually so composed, seemed disheveled by the day's tension. When it was his turn to speak, he fumed about betrayal, painting me as a cold, overbearing woman who forced him into an unfair settlement, but the judge seemed unmoved. The facts were indisputable, and no emotional theatrics could refute the documentation. After closing arguments, the judge declared he'd review everything and make a swift ruling. As we left the courtroom, Aurora slipped her arm through mine. For once, it didn't feel awkward. "Mom," she said quietly, "we've done everything we can. Whatever happens, I'm proud of you." Her words nearly made me tear up. Win or lose, I had the small victory of reclaiming my daughter's respect. A week later, the ruling came down. Lionel had no rightful claim to my property. The judge's written decision echoed what Dana and I already knew. The divorce settlement was valid, and Lionel's accusations were baseless. The house was mine entirely and unquestionably. The emotional surge of relief felt almost identical to what I experienced during the guardianship victory. It was official. I had beaten him again. That same evening, Aurora and I sat on the back porch, sipping lemonade. She looked out at the garden, the moonlight illuminating her thoughtful expression. "This place really is beautiful," she said softly. "I guess I never realized how much work goes into maintaining it." I nodded, recalling the countless weekends I'd spent pruning bushes, repainting fences, sealing driveways. All those tasks were done in solitude, fueled by heartbreak and determination. Now it felt like a testament to my resilience. We talked quietly at first about the future. Aurora admitted she was saving money to get a small apartment closer to her job. I told her I supported that, encouraged it even. As much as I appreciated our newfound understanding, we both sensed that living under one roof wasn't permanent. We needed space to let our relationship heal naturally without falling back into the old patterns of parent-child dependency. Eventually, Aurora looked at me with tears in her eyes. "I'm sorry, Mom, for everything. The accusations, the betrayal for letting Dad get inside my head. I was so angry at life that I blamed you for everything you didn't deserve." That I reached over and squeezed her hand. "I'm sorry, too. Maybe I could have handled things better with the car with your return. But we can't change the past. All we can do is move forward." In that moment, I realized I had what I truly wanted all along: acknowledgement of my worth, not just as a mother, but as a person. And Aurora was finally giving it to me. The legal battles with Lionel might have scarred me, but they also forged an unexpected path to reconnection. Sometimes adversity is the hammer that reshapes relationships into stronger forms. I'd love to hear what you think in the comments. And if you enjoyed the story, feel free to subscribe for more gentle, heartfelt moments. 2 months have passed since the final ruling, and I'm sitting here in my living room reflecting on how drastically life can change in such a short span of time. My house remains, mine unassailed by Lionel's scheming. I can walk through each room with my head held high, knowing I defended not just the property, but my autonomy, my sanity, and my right to live on my own terms. Aurora officially moved into a modest apartment downtown, close to the diner where she works. Our relationship, once so brittle, is slowly mending. She visits for lunch every other weekend, sometimes bringing groceries or a potted plant to brighten my porch. We talk openly about her mistakes, my mistakes, and the ways we can support each other without smothering or judging. She recently changed her hair color again, this time a dusty lavender that suits her newfound maturity. We might never fully erase the damage from the past, but we're on the path to something better, something healthier. As for Lionel, he's been quiet. Dana told me he reluctantly dropped all remaining claims. Maybe he finally realized that if two court battles couldn't defeat me, nothing else would. I no longer jump when the phone rings, worried about another ambush. My attorney assured me he has little ground left to stand on. Perhaps he'll always resent me for forging ahead on my own. But I've come to terms with that. My peace is worth more than his approval. Sometimes I sit behind the wheel of my new used car, a simple silver sedan I purchased with the money from selling the old one, and I smile remembering how this all began. Aurora's insults, the dented bumper, the heated confrontation in the kitchen, that impulsive decision to sell the car turned out to be the catalyst for a much larger shift in my life, a purge of negativity, a standoff against manipulation, and ironically, a chance to rebuild the mother-daughter bond from the ground up. So here I am, 72 years old, living in a house that's entirely indisputably mine, and if there's one thing I've learned, it's that sometimes you have to draw the line in the sand, no matter the risk, to protect what matters most: your self respect, your independence, and your peace of mind. Thank you so much for joining me tonight by the fireside. What a journey we've experienced together, a mother's fierce stand against betrayal, a fight for dignity, and an emotional reconciliation that was as powerful as it was unexpected. If you found this story touching, inspiring, or relatable, please give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to her Fireside Stories so you don't miss out on more incredible narratives. And remember, your voice truly matters here. Leave a comment and let me know what you thought of Frances's actions. Did she make the right choice selling her car, or should she have handled things differently? I'm eager to read your thoughts and experiences. Until next time, stay warm, stay inspired, and keep sharing your stories. Good night from her Fireside Stories.